She was the last child on the school bus every evening, and for 2 years, that ride became her silent nightmare. No one noticed, not her teachers, not even her parents, until the day she could last in class and her secret finally screamed for help. Ada's days were predictable, at least on the outside. Every morning she woke to the sound of her alarm clock blaring, a reminder that her routine had begun. The same red skirt and white blouse, the same polished shoes, the same routine that marked the beginning of her long days. Her parents, both high-powered professionals working on the island, were long gone by the time she awoke. Her mother, a banker, and her father, an architect, worked in offices that were hours away from their home on the mainland. By the time Ada left for school, they were already on their way to the city, commuting through traffic that sometimes took hours. By the time they returned home, she was already asleep, exhausted from the long day. Every day, Ada's life felt the same, except for one thing: the school bus. Every morning, the big yellow vehicle would arrive promptly at 6:30 a.m. at the entrance of Morning Sun Academy. The doors would open with a familiar hiss, and the children would tumble in, ready for a new day of school. The bus driver, Mr. Shola, was always there, a man who had been working for the school for years. He was a familiar figure, grinning, always smiling, always making sure the children were seated before he started the engine. He wasn't a large man, but his presence commanded respect. He had a way of making sure the children feel safe. Everyone called him Uncle Solo, a nickname that matched his jovial personality. No one thought twice about him. But Ada always wondered why she was the last one to be dropped off. Her parents' work late hours meant that Mr. Shola always drove her home last. The other children would scatter to their homes, and then, as the school bus became quieter, it would just be Ada and Mr. Shola alone on the bus. At first, she thought nothing of it. After all, it was routine. Mr. Shola was always friendly. He would ask her how her day was, cracked a joke, and tell her to get home safely. But something started to feel off as the months went by. It started with the way he would look at her sometimes in the rearview mirror, his eyes lingering a little too long, his smile a little too wide. At first, Ada couldn't place the discomfort in her stomach, but as time went on, she started to feel it more and more. She didn't know why, but she wanted to avoid looking at him. Her heart would race whenever they were alone, and she started to avoid speaking to him altogether. It didn't help that her parents never really asked how her day had gone. They were always too tired when they got home, always too busy to notice the subtle changes in Ada, the way her face had become blank, the way she didn't speak about her day anymore. One day it happened. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The other kids had already been dropped off. The bus was empty, and the familiar drive was growing eerily quiet. Ada tried to focus on the passing scenery outside the window. She wanted to go home. She just wanted to get through this. But instead of the bus turning toward her house, Mr. Shola took a different route. He said nothing at first. Ada remained silent, her palms sweaty as the bus turned down a long, narrow road. The houses grew fewer and farther apart, the streets darker. Mr. Shola glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his smile widening. "Don't worry, Ada," he said in his deep voice. "We are just taking a little detour today. I thought we could get to know each other better." Ada's breath caught in her throat. She didn't say anything, but her heart began to pound. The bus came to a stop in front of a secluded building, tucked away from the main road. The area was quiet, too quiet. Ada didn't recognize the place, but she was too frightened to speak. Mr. Shola turned off the engine, and the eerie silence that followed felt suffocating. Without a word, he turned around and moved toward the back of the bus. Ada froze, her body trembling. She could feel the weight of the moment. She tried to convince herself that she was just being paranoid, that she was overthinking, but she couldn't take the growing sense of dread. It wasn't until Mr. Shola reached for her that Ada knew something was terribly wrong. His hands were cold as he touched her shoulder, and the warmth that once comforted her felt like a warning. He told her to stay quiet, to not say a word, or there would be consequences. Ada's heart raced as she tried to pull away, but he was stronger than her, his grip firm, his voice commanding. That was the moment that changed everything. For the next few weeks, Ada's world became one of fear and confusion. Every afternoon, Mr. Shola would take her down that same dark road, to that same secluded spot. He would whisper his threat to her, reminding her of the promise she had made to stay silent. Ada felt the weight of those words heavy on her chest as she clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, things would go back to normal. But they didn't. With each passing day, Ada's world became more isolated. She no longer spoke to her friends. She no longer laughed at jokes. Her grades dropped. She began to feel the toll of the abuse, the exhaustion, the confusion. She couldn't concentrate in school. She couldn't focus on anything except the fear that consumed her every time she stepped in onto that bus. Still, she never spoke a word of what was happening. She couldn't. The fear of Mr. Shola's threat was too strong. The feelings of his hand, his voice, those memories haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She thought if she told anyone, it would make things worse. Ada's parents were too busy with their work. They never noticed the changes. They never noticed how pale she had become, how her laughter had faded, how her eyes no longer sparkled with the same innocence they once had. They simply didn't have the time. And that, perhaps, was the greatest tragedy of it all. 2 years passed. 2 years of suffering in silence. 2 years of pretending everything was okay. Ada's world continued to unravel. She felt like she was losing herself. Her body was tired. Her spirit was broken. She had no one to turn to, no one who would listen, and she had long stopped trusting that anyone cared enough to see the truth. But then, one day, something changed. Ada collapsed in the middle of class. It wasn't a dramatic fall. She didn't scream or clutch her chest. No, it was just a quiet, sudden loss of strength. Her body gave out in the middle of a math lesson, and the next thing she knew, she was lying on the floor, the worried faces of her classmates staring down at her. The school nurse was called, and soon Ada was on her way to the hospital. It was there, in the sterile white room, that the truth came spilling out. The doctors found physical evidence of what Ada has been going through, and they knew something was terribly wrong. They made the call. The school was contacted, and soon her parents were sitting at her bedside, their faces shaking with grief. The first words out of Ada's mother's mouth were, "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say anything?" But Ada couldn't answer. She had no words. Ada's parents were devastated. They had failed to notice the sign. They blamed themselves for not being there for their daughter. But Ada, though broken, felt a flicker of hope for the first time in years. Someone had seen, someone had listened. Mr. Shola was arrested later that night. His house was raided, and police found evidence that he had been abusing other children as well. The trial was swift. In the courtroom, Ada sat between her parents, her hand folded tightly in her lap as the man who had stolen her childhood was sentenced to life imprisonment. But even as justice was served, Ada's journey was far from over. The road to healing was long. It wasn't easy. Ada was quiet for a long time, retreating into herself. But over time, she found solace in therapy, in art, and in the love of her family. Mrs. Tenney, a kind-hearted child trauma therapist, helped her express what she couldn't say with words. Slowly, Ada started to draw again, sketching her pain and fears until they no longer held the power to consume her. Her parents too changed. They realized how much they had missed in Ada's life, how much they had taken for granted. Her mother quit her job to spend more time with her. Her father took a job closer to home. They were there for Ada finally. Truly there. Years passed. Ada grew stronger. She returned to school and little by little began to regain her confidence. She joined a support group for survivors of abuse and began to speak openly about her experiences. The girl who had once been silent was now a voice for others. And then, one day, Ada stood on the stage, her heart pounding in her chest as she gave a speech to a room full of people at her university graduation. "I was once silent by fear," she said, her voice steady but strong. "But silence is not safety, and pain is not forever. To every child out there, your voice matters. You are not alone." The crowd rose to their feet. Ada's parents, sitting in the front row, wiped tears of pride and relief. They had come a long way with their daughter, and Ada, standing tall, knew she had come even further. She had found her strength, she had found her voice, and nothing, not even the darkest of her past, could take that away. After the applause faded and the flash of graduation cameras dimmed, Ada sat alone in her dorm room, her certificate folded carefully on the desk. She stared at it, not with pride, but with quiet reflection. She had survived what many never even speak of. But survival wasn't enough. She wanted to live. And more than that, she wanted to help others live too. That night, she opened her old sketchbook, pages filled with raw, powerful images. Her trauma, her healing, her silence, her scream. For years, that sketchbook had been her only friend. Now she wanted the world to see it. She submitted it anonymously to a campus art festival under the title "The Last Drop." Each drawing showed a child alone in a bus seat, slowly replaced by a child standing tall on a stage. It went viral. Social media picked it up. Advocacy groups reached out. People began telling their own stories in response, some for the first time. Survivors messaged her, thanked her, cried with her. That old fear that used to live in her bones was still there, but now it had company, courage. Ada's parents transformed. Guilt had eaten at them for years. Her father, once distant and preoccupied, began attending support group sessions for parents of abused children. He cried during the first one, admitting aloud for the first time, "I was too busy building houses for clients to notice mine was crumbling." Her mother, formerly always on the move, became a mentor to working moms, sharing how blind ambition can cost more than a paycheck can replace. Together, they built their home, not with money or fancy furniture, but with presence. Weekly games night, open conversation, therapy as a family, laughter returned to their home, awkward at first, then genuine. It didn't erase what happened, but it rewrote what came after. One day, a letter arrived. It was from another survivor, a boy named Deji. He wrote, "Your drawings made me realize I wasn't crazy. Uncle Solo did things to me too. I thought I imagined it. I told no one until you. Ada sat frozen, holding the letter. It was happening again, but this time people were speaking. She gathered a group of students who had experienced abuse, some by relatives, others by strangers. They formed Project Safe Seat, an initiative to educate schools on spotting signs of abuse, providing safe transportation systems, and training staff to recognize behavioral changes in children. They visited schools across Lagos, then other cities. Ada told her story in auditoriums filled with students. She saw tears, she saw hope. One little girl hugged her tightly after a session and whispered, "Thank you. I didn't know I could tell." That is when Ada knew her pain had purpose now. Years later, Ada was invited to speak at a nationwide child safety summit in Abuja. She arrived in a fitted navy suit, head held high. As she finished her keynote, a woman approached her hesitant. "Ada," the woman asked, "do you remember me?" She looked closer. It was Ijoma, the former seatmate on the school bus in primary 4. The bubbly girl who used to sing loudly, who always got off just before Ada. "I always suspected something was wrong," Ijoma said softly. "That day, I told my mom that you looked sad. She said not to poke into people's family matters. I'm sorry I didn't say more." Ada hugged her. "You were a child. It wasn't your job to fix what adults should have protected." They exchanged numbers. That night, Ada cried, not from pain, but from release. Even distant memories were coming full circle. Against the advice of many, Ada requested permission to visit the prison where Mr Shola was serving his sentence. It took months of paperwork. People questioned her decision, but she needed closure. The guard led her through gates and corridors until she stood face to face with a man who had once silenced her. He looked older, smaller, weaker. She didn't flinch. He avoided her eyes. "I came," she said quietly, "not because I want anything from you, but because I needed to see who I became despite what you did." Silent. Then he whispered, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just live with it." And she walked out. She didn't look back. Ada's sketchbook, once private, became the centerpiece of her memoir, also titled The Last Job. It blended drawings, reflections, and narrative of other survivors. The book hit bestsellers list. She was invited to speak at the United Nations. Time magazine named her one of Africa's Voice of Courage. But Ada never saw herself as a celebrity. She saw herself as a girl who survived, a girl who once sat quietly in a seat bus, afraid, a girl who now stood for those still finding their voice. One afternoon, Ada volunteered at her old primary school. She sat near the gate as children ran out to their buses. A new yellow school bus pulled up, and a young man in a clean blue uniform opened the doors with a smile. The children greeted him warmly. Ada walked over and asked, "How long have you been driving this bus?" "3 years," he replied. "Every child has to be dropped in the presence of a verified adult. School is strict now. Cameras, tracking, everything. It's different." Ada smiled. She watched as each child was picked up by a parent, a guardian, someone who was present, and when the last child waved goodbye, the bus closed its door and the driver drove off alone. Ada stood still, her eyes filled with emotion. For the first time in her life, the school bus wasn't a symbol of fear, it was a symbol of change. Thank you for listening to these wonderful stories. I hope you learned one or two. Please, parents, always have time for your children. Please listen to them, watch their body changes and watch their countenance. It is very, very important. And please always pray for your children. Please help me like this video, share, and subscribe to this channel for more educative videos. See you in my next one. God bless you.